"Mr. Martinez, I need to discuss your garden," she'd announced without preamble. Dave had looked up from butling his 4-year-old daughter Sophia into her car seat. "Good morning to you too, Karen. What about my garden?" "Your tomato stakes are in violation of Section 4.23 of the landscaping guidelines. They exceed the height limit." She'd thrust the violation notice toward him with the satisfaction of someone delivering justice. Dave had taken the paper, glanced at it, then looked back at his garden. "Karen, I measured those stakes myself. They're exactly 48 inches. I can show you." "I don't need to see your measurements. I can tell by looking." Karen's voice had carried that particular tone she reserved for people who dared question her authority, a mixture of condescension and barely controlled fury that had terrorized the neighborhood for years. "But you haven't actually measured them," Dave had said, his voice carefully neutral. His wife Maria had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of Karen's rising voice. "I don't need to measure what I can see with my own eyes," Karen had declared. "You have 14 days to bring your property into compliance, or the HOA will take further action." Dave had looked at the violation notice again, then at his wife, who was shaking her head with the expression of someone watching a train wreck in slow motion. "Karen, if you just let me show you." But Karen had already been walking away, her mission accomplished, her sense of righteousness intact. She'd missed the look that passed between Dave and Maria, the silent communication of a couple who dealt with unreasonable people before and knew that logic rarely worked on someone already convinced of their own infallibility. That evening, Dave had done something that would prove to be either brilliant or catastrophic. He decided to ignore Karen's violation notice entirely. The stakes were regulation height, he had photos and measurements to prove it, and he wasn't about to reward Karen's behavior by dignifying it with a response. Karen had expected capitulation. She'd expected Dave to either remove the stakes or at least engage in the kind of groveling apology that usually followed her violation notices. What she hadn't expected was complete silence. By day 10 of her 14-day deadline, Karen's frustration had transformed into something darker. She'd driven past the Martinez house 6 times that week, each pass confirming what she already knew. Those stakes were still there, still too tall, still mocking her authority. "He's ignoring me," she'd told Gerald over dinner, stabbing her salad with unnecessary force. "Maybe because you're wrong about the stakes," Gerald had suggested mildly. Karen's fork had frozen mid-stab. "I am not wrong. I am never wrong about HOA violations." Which brought her to this moment, standing in Dave's garden at dawn, soaking wet and facing the very real possibility that she might have made a terrible mistake. The measuring tape in her hand read exactly 48 inches from the ground to the top of the nearest stake. The sprinklers shut off, leaving Karen dripping and silent in the sudden quiet. Through the kitchen window, she could see Dave reaching for his phone, his expression shifting from surprise to something that looked dangerously like amusement. Karen looked down at the measuring tape again, hoping the numbers might somehow change. They didn't. 48 inches. Exactly 48 inches. Behind her, a car door slammed. Karen turned to see her own husband standing beside his sedan in their driveway across the street, briefcase in hand, staring at his wife with the kind of horrified fascination usually reserved for natural disasters. "Karen?" Dave's voice came from behind her. She turned to see him standing on his back porch, phone still in hand, looking like a man trying very hard not to laugh. "Is there something I can help you with?" Karen Whitmore stood ankle-deep in her neighbor's prized tomato garden at 6:47 a.m., wielding a measuring tape like a weapon while wearing her pink fuzzy slippers and a bathrobe that had seen better decades. The sprinkler system chose that exact moment to activate, drenching her in ice-cold water as she shrieked loud enough to wake half the Willowbrook Estate subdivision. 20 feet away, Dave Martinez stared through his kitchen window in disbelief, coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips, watching the HOA board president's wife destroy 3 months of careful gardening in her quest to measure whether his tomato stakes exceeded the community's vegetation support structure height limit by the 2 inches she was absolutely certain they did. The whole mess had started 3 weeks earlier, when Karen received her monthly HOA violation reports, her favorite light reading, according to her husband Gerald, who'd grown tired of her nightly rants about property values and community standards. Karen had been cruising the neighborhood in her white BMW SUV, kitboard in hand, when she spotted Dave's garden. The tomato stakes looked suspicious. Too tall, too defiant. "Gerald, look at this," she'd announced that evening, spreading photos across their granite kitchen island. "The Martinez family thinks they can just ignore our landscaping guidelines. Those stakes are clearly over the 48-inch limit." Gerald had glanced up from his newspaper with the weary expression of a man who'd been married to Karen for 15 years. "Maybe they're exactly 48 inches, honey. Maybe you should actually measure before." "I know what I see," Karen had snapped, her perfectly manicured finger jabbing at the photos. "And what I see is a family that thinks rules don't apply to them." The next morning, Karen had marched over to the Martinez house with her official HOA violation notice, already filled out in her precise handwriting. Dave had been loading his kids into the car for school when she approached, kitboard clutched against her chest like armor.